you see me. I had a meeting today with a gentleman here in Cincinnati, and he told me that he was in a meeting with some local leaders, and he shared with me a document from this meeting. The gentleman that I'm speaking of is a black gentleman who's very dedicated and committed to the youth in Cincinnati. And two things happened as a result at this meeting. Well, at this meeting, he received a handout, and unfortunately, I don't currently don't have a copy of this handout, but I will have one, and I will show it to you. My plan is to show this handout to you in the next episode. And something very profound happened at this meeting where they were discussing basically the future of the city and talking about the city's youth and the problems within the city and how to resolve these issues. Let me first say they don't have a clue. And the fact, and that's a fact because these liberal radical leftists have been trying to resolve these issues in the urban core for years, and it's only gotten worse. Whether you're talking about violence, whether you're talking about schools, whatever it may be, everything's getting worse. But speaking of schools, and I've mentioned this before, the city of Cincinnati, the Cincinnati School Board thought that it would be a good idea to go out and hire a female from the worst school district in the country at the time, which would be the Detroit Public Schools. And they thought that they could peddle her off to us. And they thought that they could, and they did tell us that this was the future, that she represented the future. Now, I don't know how you hire someone from the worst school district in the country, from a failing school district, and then you tell us that she's our best chance at improving our schools. It makes no sense. But it was a DEI hire because it was a black female. And really, at the end of the day, the only thing that the educational system wants to do is to hide their Luciferian demonic agenda behind a black female. Why? Because that's, as I have explained, that's political blackface. If you put your agenda behind a black female, it has double protection. They can always play the race card if you reject the agenda, and they can also play the misogynist card if you reject the agenda. And that's exactly what they do. If you reject the agenda, or whatever it is that this black female is suggesting that we do, then you will be called a racist and a misogynist. And that's the political blackface game that they play. And political blackface, for the 1000th time, is a term that I came up with to describe how the left uses and manipulates black people, but in particular, 9 times out of 10, it's a black female that they're using to push forward this agenda by playing political blackface and giving that agenda to her to move forward with. But back to this meeting. In this meeting that a friend of mine had attended, he was actually he was thrown off because these liberals actually admitted in the meeting that they would rather work with Hispanics than blacks. You heard it here first. But I've been telling you all along that the great replacement was replacing blacks, the Democrat Party replacing blacks with Hispanics. Once again, that's why Biden opened the border and has allowed in 10 million illegals in 3 years. You're being replaced. You see it happening in New York. You see it happening in Chicago. You see it happening in Boston. And you see it happening in all of our major American cities, and we see it happening right here in Cincinnati. Your resources are being reallocated to these Hispanic illegals, not asylum seekers, not immigrants, not illegal immigrants, none of that. They are illegals. I'm going to pause and ask that I'm going to run a commercial for myself. You see the ticker at the bottom. Please contribute to help this podcast and this network grow and help the rapid dissemination of consequential information, because the information that I'm bringing forth here and that I'm willing to bring forth here is the linchpin that's going to save America. I've explained that and I will continue to explain that. So then he hands me a document and he said, this is the document that they were passing out at this meeting. And this meeting, and when he slid the document across the table, I said, well, I want to see what the title is on the document and where do I find the sponsors? He said, well, turn it over to sponsors on the other side at the bottom. That's key. Now, he wasn't aware of the importance and the relevance of these sponsors, and that's not to say anything about him at all. He's a very knowledgeable man, very dedicated man. But I had to inform him and enlighten him and let him know that these organizations, and I laughed. I said, these are all of your radical leftist organizations. And I will say that the Department of Education was one of the sponsors, and they are very much a radical leftist organization. And I could elaborate on that, but I won't. Let me tell you another prominent sponsor featured on this document, the Tides Foundation, a George Soros organization. And then there were other radical leftist organizations on this document that were sponsoring this event. But I say that to say this to you conservative listeners in Cincinnati, greater Cincinnati, which is Cincinnati, southwestern Ohio, southeastern Indiana, and northern Kentucky. And even on down, a lot of you central Kentuckians are in the area quite a bit. George Soros is very actively involved in our politics. That document demonstrated that when I saw the Tides Foundation down there, and there were a couple of other organizations on there that George Soros, his money has influenced, but very prominently, George Soros is very much responsible for the Tides Foundation and the funding of that organization, that entity. So he is very active in our community. I then explained to him who George Soros was, and I then explained to him that he's in his 90s. I told him very briefly about his history in Nazi Germany and how he was a liberal, irreligious Jew, and how he's now transitioning his son to take over. And so his son, being the evil entity that he is, will now fill the evil shoes of the father. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to take the opportunity to promote this thing, and I want you to please disseminate my videos, send out the links, share them with one another via text messages, emails, etc. Help the podcast to grow. Please leave comments. Please hit the follow and the like buttons on whatever and subscribe button on whatever platform you may come across anything associated with the Exodus Media Network, and leave comments. So the great replacement is currently taking place. Illegals are replacing blacks as the prominent premier minority. These Hispanics are replacing us as the prominent minority in this country. All of the resources that have been typically used for blacks and set aside for blacks is currently being shifted. Now, what should happen as this shift takes place Black Americans should now shift their vote to the Republican Party, to Donald Trump, to MAGA, to the conservatives. If they want to shift your resources from you to people of color, in particular, illegal Hispanics from south of the border, then you should shift your allegiance, your political allegiance, your vote to the Republican, MAGA, conservatives. Christian conservatives, you need to stop standing on the sideline and you need to now come out and vote in numbers that have not been seen in years. Biden is doing this. He is allowing these 10 million people because he doesn't think very much of you blacks. He views black people through the lens of a Southern racist, going back to the 30s and the 40s. Kamala Harris is a sellout. And I say that, but let me also make it clear that Kamala Harris is not a black female. She is an Asian female because she's 50% Asian. I've said this many times. She's 25% black and 25% white. So let's call it as it is. But she has never had any type of real allegiance to the black community. She has never really identified with the black community. When she went to a HBCU, it was not because she identified with the black community. It was because she understood what her goals were politically and the direction that she wanted to go in. And she understood at that time, and she understands now, that you have to pander to blacks. And I am here to tell you that the pandering to blacks began for Kamala Harris back at her HBCU, Howard University. And the proof is when she makes comments about what type of music she listened to while she was in college, trying to come off as quote unquote black, but that particular music and those particular artists had not released the music that she was claiming that she was listening to at that point in time. So that shows that she really doesn't identify with blacks, but she just suggested to you the first thing that came to her mind. And foolishly, she told you that she was listening to two particular artists that hadn't even released the music that she was claiming that she was listening to at that point in time. That establishes her, along with many other things, as being fake, as being a phony. She is a charlatan. She rose to prominence by being a political whore, literally, and giving up the goodies to Willie Brown, former mayor of San Francisco. And she slept with Willie Brown over so many years in order to make sure that she could get what she eventually obtained, that is political prominence, appointments to a couple of boards, a brand new BMW, cash, and other things. And that's what she did. She sacrificed herself on the political casting couch to Willie Brown. And once she realized that she no longer needed Willie Brown, she promptly let him know that if he said anything or did anything to impose upon her political aspirations, she would have him dealt with. Further evidence that she has never identified with the black community, except where she saw that it was to her advantage so that she could obtain the things that she wanted to obtain financially and politically. After all of this was said and done, she went out and she married a liberal, irreligious Jewish guy. You see, she has never identified with black, even though she now champions herself as a black female. She is the border czar. So while you individuals across America, but in particular in New York and Chicago, are angry or upset with Joseph Robinette Biden and the Democrat Party and Brandon Johnson, and I can't call his name right now, the mayor of New York, for inviting, being very welcoming to these illegals and giving them all types of financial resources and things that they have not offered to you, uh, even free college education has been offered to them, suggested that that should be given to them in New York City. Um, these people, well, you have to understand that Kamala Harris sold you out in that whole situation as well, because she's the border czar. She was promptly placed as the border czar, but Joseph Robinette Biden. Now, I understand what he's doing there. That's more political blackface. Remember, they always put their death, destruction, and debauchery behind a blackface, so that when you attack their death, destruction, and debauchery, which I call the 3Ds, the 3D culture, they can then refer to you as being misogynist and racist. Furthermore, he knew that people would not be as quick to go after Kamala Harris for this open border, simply because, as I just said, she has sold herself as being a black female, and obviously she is a female. Also, these are the people of this ilk are the people that gave us the term people of color. People of color has basically assigned black minority status to everyone else that has color in them, but isn't Negroid. And these illegals are referred to as people of color. So basically, all people of color that aren't Negroid have been grandfathered in to the civil rights movement, to the black movement, to your minority status, ladies and gentlemen. Let me say this. They've been grandfathered into your black minority status, and this should concern you, but let's just enlighten you some. Without experiencing slavery, the KKK, lynching, black codes, Jim Crow, etc. So they didn't have to go through the black experience. There's another individual that was selected and placed into the Oval Office, and that individual's name is Barack Obama. Barack Obama has no family to speak of that went through the black experience in America. Remember, according to them, his father is just an African guy that was here temporarily, and he has a white mom. So that's why Barack Obama never identified with you, but he had to play this game and try to present himself as some soul brother, humming and moaning Al Green and trying to talk and pontificate to you in a way that he deemed to be black. And I saw right through it from day one. I said that's an act, but it doesn't take much of an act to emotionally stimulate black folk and to get you on board. Paul Wall, the rapper, is more black than Barack Obama. And that's not a knock against Paul Wall. I'm just being honest. Now, I'm going to go over a few things here this evening. And this is somewhat of an educational process, because there's certain information that we need to know and that I need to give you if I'm going to nudge you and get you over here to where you need to be politically, which is off the Democrat Party plantation. So I'm going to start with Martin Luther King Jr. And I've said this before, but it must be reiterated as often as I can reiterate it, because as I said before, I don't know who's watching and who has watched before, or whether you have seen previous episodes. And so I have to quite often reiterate things. Martin Luther King and others, ladies and gentlemen, this may hurt you to your heart. This may hurt you to your core. I often tell people that every urban core, every city area that has a Martin Luther King Boulevard, those signs should be taken down immediately and replaced with Frederick Douglass Boulevard. Because Frederick Douglass is the original true father of the civil rights movement in America. And Martin Luther King is somebody that came and stumbled along later on in the game and is often given credit for the civil rights movement, when in reality, the whole selling out process of the civil rights movement began under King. And all those guys that were right there with him, i.e. Jesse Jackson, etc. And you all are very familiar with Jesse Jackson. You see the fruits or the lack thereof of his labors. You see that Jesse Jackson was a self-indulged individual. It was all about Jesse Jackson. And Jesse Jackson, as a result of the role that he played, which wasn't much of a role, but he inserted himself into a role. And the purpose of that role was really to benefit Jesse Jackson financially and politically. He has amassed a large amount of wealth. But you cannot tell me what Jesse Jackson has ever accomplished. You cannot tell me one thing that Jesse Jackson did that caused Black people to benefit something. Back to King. King and others sold out the civil rights movement to the LGBTQs. Yes, I said it and I'm going to repeat it, but I'm just getting started. I told you before that Martin Luther King sold out the civil rights movement to the LGBTQs. That's the reason why when you look at pictures of Martin Luther King during the civil rights movement, if you pay close attention and you know who and what to look for, you will quite often see Bayard Rustin sitting off in the background. He was a homosexual man who was considered to be Martin Luther King's mentor. And that homosexual man, as I've stated before, was caught in a sexual act in public in the back of a car, having what people typically refer to as a train ran on him by two white males. One white male was penetrating him from behind while he was giving head to the other white male. This is a matter of public record. Don't just hear it, research it. And that individual's name was Bayard Rustin. And once you go and you research and you look up that name and you look at his picture and then you go and begin to search, and you're going to see him always there somewhere in the background. That was supposedly Martin Luther King's mentor. But let's talk about how he really got there. But first, let me say this. Bayard Rustin also said back in the 60s, when he was in the civil rights movement in the 50s, he said that homosexuals were the new nigger. Boom. That's at that point and around about that time. But that is certainly one of the statements and acts that signified this whole thing where the LGBTQs were immersed into the civil rights movement by King and white liberals and others. That signified something there, ladies and gentlemen. That signified this thing. And the reason why they were able to infiltrate and come into this movement, because the movement had a lot of issues. There was a lot of bickering going back and forth between all of the so-called leaders. Some wanted to do this, some wanted to do that. Some wanted to say this, some wanted to say that, and so on and so forth. And the movement was very light on cash and resources. And white liberals, with their Luciferian agenda, saw this as an opportunity to step in and seize this opportunity to bankroll the movement, because not only was the movement lacking in funds, but many of the individuals in the movement were lacking in funds and they had bills to pay. So this was an opportunity that was seized because they were able to come into the movement and say, okay, we'll fund the movement and we'll fund people individually, but you have to first sign off on this and subscribe to this. And one of those things that they had to sign off on and subscribe to was allowing the LGBTQs, the homosexuals, into the movement and allowing some of them to play prominent roles and offering no resistance to this. Now, this is a problem because quite often, many of the leaders in the civil rights movement in the 50s and the 60s were Black pastors. So what the white liberals accomplished is they were able to get the Black church, i.e. the Black pastors, to look away and to embrace and accept the LGBTQs, the homosexuals, into the civil rights movement. That is how the Black church began to compromise itself in the early days. And these Black pastors began to compromise themselves in those early days of the civil rights movement. Now listen to this. Once you crack that door open, there's no turning back for them. And they cracked that door open, and the LGBTQs swung the door wide open. And we now see the complete manifestation of them in the civil rights movement and society as a whole in 2024. The sodomite debaucherous group of individuals are now featured very prominently all throughout society. They have their own month. They fly the flags all over the country in all of our major urban areas in the month of June, which is the month that for some reason has been assigned to them, and so on and so forth. But the white liberals provided financing and power. But that came with a price, and the price was compromising the movement by allowing in the LGBTQs. And later on, the movement was compromised more recently throughout the Obama administration when they coined the term people of color. And that now meant that all other people would be included. And there was nothing that we could do or say about it. And we had to then begin to concede those resources that had typically been set aside for Black Americans who, as I said before, went through slavery, the KKK, lynching, Black codes, and Jim Crow. And you individuals that are living and breathing today didn't go through it, but your ancestors did, and your great ancestors and great ancestors and your moms and dads experienced Black only drinking fountains and restrooms and getting their food at the back door of the restaurant in the alley. And now people of color have been grandfathered in to your Black minority status. Thurgood Marshall, he was involved in the civil rights movement. Thurgood Marshall, along with King, was very welcoming to the LGBTQs, and he made no bones about it, and he was very determined to make sure that everybody else embraced them. Thurgood Marshall, I tell people, not only did he help the LGBTQs infiltrate the civil rights movement, but he also sold out Black life. He sold out Black life because his vote during the Roe v. Wade was a vote for murder. His vote was a vote for abortion. His vote was a vote for Moloch. Moloch is the god of child sacrifice. And white liberals at that time and now are very careful to make sure that they keep a steady stream of innocent, defenseless babies being sacrificed on the altar of Moloch. And who have they gotten to subscribe to that disproportionately and more so than anybody? Black females. And maybe tonight I'm going to get to this segment that I've constructed about Black females to help expose some of the things that need to be exposed, because in the Black community, Black females are pretty much allowed to function with impunity. And in the media, they're allowed to function with impunity, and not even Black men can hold them accountable. And this nonsense must stop. Pause. At the bottom of the screen is the ticker. This message, this information, what I say specifically here at the Exodus Media Network, must get the ability, the legs, the financial backing to be rapidly and widely disseminated to every section, area, nook and cranny of this country. And that's how you contribute to help the cause. If you're listening, you should contribute. If you share, you should tell them to contribute. If you share the broadcast, the podcast with somebody else, it's very important that you pass the message of contribution forward. So Thurgood Marshall is not a hero of mine, even though white liberals will prominently feature him and talk about him, even still in the classroom in high school. No, we should totally reject him, because he opened the floodgates for the attack on innocent, defenseless babies and innocent and defenseless Black life. And I say that because you people say Black Lives Matter, but I don't believe that you mean that. And I know you don't mean that if you subscribe to BLM, the entity, the organization, because that's not what they're about. They were about raising as much money as rapidly as they could and then getting out of town. And they were all about promoting LGBTQs and pedophiles and pedophilia. I was explaining to a friend today, and so I have to mention this because this is very relevant and this isn't talked about enough. There was and I've talked about this in other podcasts, but as I said, I have to reiterate. Reiteration has to be a very prominent part of what I do. There was a court case, Supreme Court case, Zellman versus Simmons Harris. Doris Simmons Harris from Cleveland, Ohio, was the face of the anti-voucher movement. She was the face of the political blackface inserted by white liberals to stop school choice in Ohio. Doris Simmons Harris, Black female, Cleveland, Ohio, like you see very prominently happening today, was just another Black female that allowed white liberals to use her to persecute and crucify and further destroy her own people. How so? She was the face of the anti-school choice, the anti-voucher movement in Ohio, and it was her face and her name that took that fight to the Supreme Court in order to kill school vouchers in Ohio. But fortunately, they were unsuccessful at doing that. So today you have school vouchers in failing urban core school districts in Ohio. And as a result, you have thousands and thousands and thousands of Black children in Ohio able to get vouchers and to attend Christian and Catholic parochial schools and receive that good quality education that for years mostly white kids were able to receive. So if you're hearing this and you're in a state that doesn't provide school vouchers, this is something that you need to work for. We have it in Ohio. It works very well, and Black kids have benefited from this very heavily. And I have explained this before, but the most expeditious, and they say the most expeditious way for these inner city urban core Black kids to go from poverty to begin to create wealth and live the American dream is through a quality education, i.e. being able to access school vouchers. So if education, a good education, is the most expeditious way to lift you from poverty to a middle class, to upper middle class, to wealthy lifestyle, then I can't for the life of me understand Actually, I can. Why Democrats, why blacks, why those that profess to be pro-black, why those that profess to be anti-poverty would want to keep these vouchers away from these poor inner city kids. And once again, that was Doris Simmons Harris and white liberals that were responsible for that. Doris Simmons Harris represented political blackface. Doris Simmons Harris allowed white liberals to hide their 3D culture agenda behind her gender and her race. And I guarantee you she wasn't compensated or rewarded. But she let them use her to launch an all-out assault on black kids in Ohio. Now, unions are against school vouchers because that takes money away from public schools. Okay? And that money that would stay in that failing public school is now used in the form of a voucher to send these kids to these private schools where the kids are not failing, where the kids are graduating and going on to college. So the unions are angry about that, and the unions are always trying to stop vouchers along with the Democrats and white liberals. So that tells me very clearly, that tells you even more importantly, that Democrats and unions and white liberals are anti-black. They are anti-black children, and they have no vested interest in the education of our children. Even today, right here in Cincinnati, Ohio, they are complaining about the amount of money that is spent per pupil. Now, in Cincinnati, Ohio, in this area, our wealthiest zip codes happen to be Indian Hill and Terrace Park. That's where you have a large concentration of very, very wealthy individuals. I happen to know that in Indian Hill, they spend about $3,000 less per pupil, I believe it is, than what we spend here in the city in Cincinnati Public Schools, CPS, in the urban district. So if CPS is spending approximately $3,000 more per student, yet their failure rate is extremely high, that and Indian Hill spends about $3,000 less, and their success rate is extremely high. That means that dollars and gentlemen like Dr. Thomas Sowell have already revealed this. He's already given you the numbers, the facts on this, but that further reveals that dollars do not equate to education. In particular, dollars do not equate into a good education. So the amount spent per pupil is, ladies and gentlemen, is irrelevant. It is a lie that has always been fed to you by the left, by liberals, by Democrats, and by the union type, because they want more and more money spent so that that money can trickle down to these unions. That's what this is all about. So they're willing to sacrifice your kids' education so that the unions can be well funded, and so that then the Democrat Party can be well funded during campaign season, because the unions are the biggest contributors to the Democrat Party. I've just given you what you need to know. So now you no longer have to fall for the lies and deceit associated with education in America. Now you know that it is the Democrat Party that has no interest in your child's education, ladies and gentlemen. And last but not least, but this is the linchpin of the subject matter, Republicans are the ones passing school vouchers. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, those evil, racist Republicans. We're the ones passing school vouchers, extending this opportunity to black kids. And I saw an interview, and this ignorant ass Stephen A. Smith, who's a coon, and Charlemagne the Devil, who's a coon, was talking about, in particular Charlemagne, but both of them were talking about how they don't think MAGA is good for black folk. Well, ladies and gentlemen, MAGA is about school choice. MAGA is about school vouchers. Okay, so right there, that dispels not the myth, but the lie that they told. And I'm going to move further into that very briefly, because here's what I want to say. Now I'm going to skip over to this, then I'm going to come back. They said that Charlemagne the Devil and Stephen A. Smith came to the conclusion that they had no problem with black conservatives, but they had a problem with MAGA and black MAGA folk. I mean, because, and what they were not insinuating or suggesting, what they were saying was that MAGA, and they very clearly said, as a matter of fact, I got the quote is somewhere. They said that, here's what Charlemagne said. He said, it feels like MAGA is against the basic interests of Black people. So let's deal with that for a moment. If Charlemagne the Devil and Stephen A. Smith can come to the conclusion that it feels like MAGA is against the basic interests of Black people, then we have to analyze it. We have to look into that using the facts, using what is available to us. MAGA means Make America Great Again. I'm an American, you're an American, so MAGA has to inherently include us. But I'm going to show you beyond just the simple terms and terminology how MAGA does include you and how MAGA is in your best interest, and how political novices and coons like Stephen A. Smith and Charlemagne the Devil should not be opening their big mouths, continuing to mislead Black people the way white liberal Democrats want them to mislead Black people, thereby keeping them on the Democrat Party plantation. Ladies and gentlemen, follow me. I'm going to read off very briefly some things that MAGA gave you from 2016 to 2020. MAGA gave you financial prosperity. MAGA held back the illegals. Trump held them back, didn't let them in. He had his remain in Mexico policy. So I'm going to reiterate. Charlemagne the Devil, and I'm going to reiterate this all through this segment, this brief segment. Charlemagne the Devil and Stephen A. Smith said MAGA is against the basic interests of Black people. No, Black people, you tell me. Is financial prosperity in your interest? Yes or no? Absolutely it is. Okay. We all in agreement. Is holding back illegals in your basic interest? Absolutely it is. We all agree. We see what's taking place all across America, in particular, New York and Chicago, in the news every day, about how these illegals are being given their resources. Basically, the Democrats are handing over Black communities to illegals. So MAGA refused to do that and held them back and said, no, you're not coming here. So that proves to me on those two instances and proves to you, more importantly, thank you, Exodus Media Network, that financial prosperity and holding back illegals is MAGA and in the best interests of Blacks. Trump made sure that HBCUs were well funded and better funded than any president in the history of America, even Barack Hussein Obama, who identified as Black but is actually half white. So if HBCUs are well funded, if we have financial prosperity under Trump, and if the illegals were being held back and not allowed to be thrown on our backs, those things we know are in the best interest of Black people, and all of that is MAGA, because MAGA gave us that. So Charlemagne the Devil and Stephen A. Smith, when you say that MAGA is against the basic interests of Black people, you're a liar, and you know you're lying, but I'm going to continue on. Also, and this is very important, we had cheap gas under Trump. We had cheap energy under Trump. We had very inexpensive, cheap food under Trump. Thereby, on a day-to-day level, on a very real level, because as day-to-day, very real people, we're making trips to the fueling station. We're making trips to the grocery store because you got to feed a family every day. You have to turn on your heat and or either your air conditioning and other utilities. And under Trump, this stuff was much, much less expensive. So you tell me it's cheap gas, cheap food, and energy, and well-funded HBCUs and holding illegals back and financial prosperity. You tell me, ladies and gentlemen, is that in the best interest of Blacks? Because that's all MAGA. So once again, Stephen A. Smith and Charlemagne the Devil, when you say it feels like MAGA is against the best interest of Black people, well, I'm proving to you tonight that you're dead wrong. You are dead wrong. Also, under MAGA, MAGA gave us the First Step Act, jail reform. Now, you Black folks been crying for that for years. Now, I don't even agree with the First Step Act. I don't agree with the way they did jail reform and who was allowed out. But he did it because y'all asked for it. Isn't that in the best interest of Blacks? You asked for that. You wanted jail reform. MAGA, Trump gave it to you. along with everything else. Also, along with Tim Scott, he created opportunity zones in these urban core areas that resulted in increased business, economic growth, and entrepreneurship amongst minorities, i.e. blacks. Isn't that in the best interest of black people? That's MAGA. MAGA gave you that. Not Biden and Harris, not Obama and Biden, not Clinton and Gore. MAGA gave you that. MAGA gave you the things that you have been begging for years that you have never gotten. MAGA gave you that. Therefore, MAGA is in the best interest of blacks. Veterans' choice. How many blacks are veterans? Veterans were out here in a very deplorable situation. Trump came in and gave us veterans' choice so that he allowed veterans to have the choice to not just go to the VA hospitals, but to go to other hospitals and receive care so that they could get the care that they deserved and desired. MAGA gave you that. You got all these black veterans. So you tell me, ladies and gentlemen, you tell me, Charlamagne the Devil and Stephen A. Coon Smith, isn't MAGA in the best interest of black people? You need to get your facts straight before you open your dirty mouths and start to speak a certain way on certain things that you know nothing about. One is a coon that needs to stick to this destructive hip hop industry, and the other one is a coon that needs to stick to sports. The opioid crisis, how many blacks are addicted to drugs, to opioids? Well, Trump pushed that initiative to get these non-addictive painkillers. Also under Trump, overdose deaths dropped for the first time in forever. That's MAGA that gave you that. Isn't that in the best interest of black folk? Absolutely it is. The lowest black unemployment ever. MAGA gave you that. So Stephen A. Smith and Charlamagne the Devil, it's very clear that MAGA is in the best interest of black folks. I didn't necessarily agree with this, but MAGA doubled the child tax credit. How many black folks have kids? How many of y'all benefited from that? So then, therefore, MAGA was in the best interest of black people. 6 million new jobs, 1 million in manufacturing, energy, and the construction sector. Obama said that wasn't possible. Trump did it. Why? Because he's a businessman and he knows how to grow the business of the United States, and he did it. When they said he couldn't do it, and they actually laughed at him when he said he was going to do it, but he did it. And how many of those jobs went to blacks and minorities? Millions of them did. Is that not in the best interest of black folk? All that MAGA that I'm talking about. The first time ever in the United States of America for a period, MAGA did this right here, what I'm about to state. You had a period, an extended period of time in the United States of America where most new hires were minorities and women. And then they told you that he was a misogynist. And they told you that he didn't want the wealth to make it into the hands of minorities, but I've clearly demonstrated how it has done just that. When in America had you seen most new hires be minorities and women? Never. MAGA did that. MAGA gave you that. So Stephen A. Smith, the coon, and Charlamagne the Devil, who's also a coon, you said that it feels like MAGA isn't in the basic interest of black people. And I'm giving you all of these things, showing you how black folk benefited from MAGA. So this tells me, as I've often stated, that you are political novices and you're not really in tune to what's going on, and you've already been predestined and predetermined to say the thing that's in the best interest of the dirty Democrat Luciferian people that's running around out here. Therefore, you won't even give Trump when Trump has gone out here and busted his ass and deserved credit and where credit is due. That's because you're slaves on the plantation. He took 7 million new people off of welfare. Now, there's plenty of blacks on welfare, plenty of whites on welfare, but we're talking about you Negroes because Stephen A. Smith, the coon, and Charlamagne the Devil, the coon, said that it feels like MAGA is against the basic interests of black people. Everybody doesn't need to open their mouth. But unfortunately, these two idiots thought they would open their mouths. In that podcast, Charlemagne the Devil made excuses for all of Biden's racism and for his 50-year history of racism. He made excuses. He even made excuses for when Biden told him, you ain't black if you don't vote for me. He made an excuse for it. Go listen to the podcast. I hate to send you over to listen to it, but I'm probably going to put something out later on and chop this up and insert that in here. Trump created a program where 13 million persons were involved in training programs with many of our corporations here in the United States. How many of those people? Many of those people were black. So once again, and that's my last example, but there's many, many more. Once again, I have proven how MAGA was in the basic best interest of black people. And I have proven that Charlemagne the Devil and Stephen A. Smith the Coon were absolutely 100% wrong when they said it feels like MAGA is against the basic interests of black people. They're idiots. And when they open their mouths, it's dangerous. It's dangerous to the future of America. It's dangerous to the state of America. It's dangerous to the political welfare and life of black Americans, because they're pushing these lies and this deceit. Ladies and gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen. Why must you listen, comment, share, and follow and subscribe and contribute? I've laid that out. That's what you should do by all means as it relates. I need you to listen. I need you to leave comments. I need you to share these episodes. I need you to hit the follow and the subscribe button. And last but certainly not least, I need you to contribute, because my goal, the goal for the Exodus Media Network, is to raise money and be able to rapidly and widely disseminate this message to every nook and cranny in this country, because people need to hear this so that they can be freed from the shackles of this Democrat Party plantation. And it's important that they get it here, because I'm also going to let you know, and I'm not going to be shy about this fact here. The only way to do this, the only way to truly accomplish this and impact hearts and minds and make this lasting, is you have to understand that we all have to be on one accord against the sodomite invasion, abortion, period, has to be 100% outlawed in the United States of America, and no state has the right to allow it. And God said that, and the Bill of Rights makes that abundantly clear as well. And we have to be on one accord against this false climate science, which only seeks to usurp our personal liberty. Listen, comment, share, follow, subscribe, contribute. You see it at the bottom of the screen. This podcast, this message, what I'm stating is your best chance to defeat the left, to defeat the Luciferians, to defeat the Democrats, to defeat the rhinos, the liberals, the racist white liberals, and the black Democrat voting slaves, and the liberally religious Jews. They are the cabal on the left that is dismantling and destroying everything. And that's why MAGA is necessary, because MAGA seeks to make America great again, but MAGA needs an engine to power it. And MAGA can't prosper, can't accomplish what its goal is unless it has MAGCA, which is Make America Judeo-Christian again. And I'll bring it up on the bottom of the screen. MAGCA, Make America Judeo-Christian again. And that is what I'm stating. That is what I'm putting out. And then, as I said, and I put it there on the screen, MAGA must be powered by MAGCA if MAGA is to be successful, because MAGA alone cannot do it. MAGA needs Judeo-Christian values and culture. MAGA needs Jesus Christ. This cannot happen. MAGA had 4 years. MAGA did some wonderful things. MAGA won that election. But MAGA can't create the lasting success and MAGA can't begin to give us separation from this 3D culture of death, destruction, and debauchery if it isn't powered by MAGA, which is Make America Judeo-Christian Again. Ladies and gentlemen, that is the most important statement that I've made here today, arguably. MAGA needs the engine of MAGA if we're going to create distance between us, our society, and this death, destruction, and debauchery, this sodomite culture, this radical leftist baby murdering culture, this radical leftist DEI culture, this radical leftist climate science lie. We need MAGA. MAGA, another construct, something that I constructed. I talked about political blackface, but I'm going to say one more thing very rapidly. The effect that political blackface has is this, and I mentioned this before. It paralyzes, in particular, white conservative men because they are very fearful of being called racist and misogynist. So that's the reason why the left plays political blackface, put a blackface in front of their agenda, typically a female, so that the white conservative men can be paralyzed by the fear of being called racist or misogynist. These are key points. This is consequential information. You're not getting this way anywhere else. You're not getting this. Nobody else is describing it and articulating it like this because they don't have the same message. While they may be called and considered to be conservatives, they don't have this conservative message because this conservative message is complete because of MAGA. Because of MAGA. And while I'm at it, let me put on the screen the moniker that I've assigned to the United States is that we are a Judeo-Christian capitalist constitutional republic. That is one of the many things that I've constructed, created, come up with by the grace of God to help you all understand and wrap your head around what it is that needs to be done, what I'm saying, and how we need to deal with these issues. And when you begin to see things from the point of view of MAGA, Make America Judeo-Christian Again, and when you begin to identify America as a Judeo-Christian capitalist constitutional republic, when you begin to understand that life is not ever can be brought into question, therefore it's not a states' rights issue as it relates to abortion, the country must outlaw it, the federal government must outlaw it in all 50 states because murder is never a right. I explained to my buddy today when we were meeting and we were talking about some things, and I'm explaining to all of my Black, Republican, and conservative friends that we have to partner, align, ally with our conservative white brothers, and we must do it expeditiously. Like yesterday. If we're going to save America and if we really think America is worth saving. Now, people understand the World Economic Forum, the United Nations. The World Economic Forum was founded by Klaus Schwab. The United Nations is a radical leftist organization, ladies and gentlemen. Rules for Radicals, book written by Saul Alinsky. It is one of the primary Bible of the left, of the Democrats, of these Luciferians. And one of the first things he outlined in that publication is that they have to destroy religious dogma, in particular, Judeo-Christian religious dogma. And this is the book that all of your Democrat leaders have learned from, idolize, cherish. It's their Bible. And their Bible, first and foremost, constructed by Saul Alinsky, an evil, irreligious Jewish Luciferian, said they have to eliminate religious dogma, but in particular, Judeo-Christian religious dogma, if they are to be successful at ushering in their, what I call 3D culture of death, destruction, and debauchery. You heard this. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm giving it to you straight with no chaser. Cloudward pivoting is a very pivotal, important part of the left and what they do, which means overload the system inorganically, artificially, causing it to fail, and then turning around and telling you that I told you. They will then turn around and tell you that capitalism could not sustain, was not sustainable. Therefore, they want to then try and switch us to their new system, their new agenda, which is a socialist, Marxist, liberal, progressive system. That's their plan. The 10 million illegals was also served to help overload the system so they can then say capitalism failed. This is what they're trying to do. They're trying to inorganically, artificially overload our American capitalist system so that they can then come out and say, look, it has failed you. We must now move in this socialist, Marxist, communist direction. That is the simple gist of it. All of this increased welfare. Obama grew the welfare rolls tremendously. Welfare is socialism. The larger they make the welfare system, the more dependent people they have relying on less and less people that are working that can fund the dependent people. That causes a system to collapse. That causes the system to inch closer and closer to collapsing. So understand, they're increasing the welfare rolls. They're increasing the amount of illegals coming in with nowhere to go, nothing to do. And this is causing an artificial collapse of our Judeo-Christian capitalist constitutional republic. So they can then come out and tell you, hey, we told you it didn't work. That's what they want to do. That is the goal. All of this printing of money, all of this borrowing of money, all this allowing crime and not really wanting to do what should be done about crime, being proactive so that it's not a reactionary thing where the police show up after the fact. Let's get into the hearts and the minds of these kids between the ages of 8 and 14 and be proactive towards keeping them from having this desire to go out and participate in criminal activity because they fully understand the consequences and the fact that they don't benefit from it. Not allowing school choice. That's a part of this overall thing that they're using to collapse the system. This whole promotion of people of color and LGBTQs, this is all meant to collapse the system. And what part of the system does the LGBTQs collapse? That's the debauchery aspect. They want to collapse marriage, the institution that God created it. They want to promote that debauchery, and that will collapse the culture morally. This is an artificial collapse. This is an inorganic collapse instituted by these Luciferians on the left. That's why this must go viral. The false climate agenda is all towards the collapsing of our country and destroying your individual rights and freedoms as a citizen. If tomorrow they could take up the interstate highway, they would, because they don't want you to have that freedom of movement. They want to restrict you to 15-minute cities, ladies and gentlemen. This is what's going on. This is what is going on. They want to push us into this communal living society. Trump took us out of the Paris Climate Accords. Biden put us back in it. They accomplished nothing. The only thing that they accomplished is restricting your freedom as an individual. I've gone over that. I'm not going to go into the details of that today, but I will say this. They want to take away your First Amendment rights. They want to take away your Second Amendment rights. The First Amendment to the left, let me tell you what it represents. To them, it represents a verbal and intellectual challenge via debate of their ideas. They do not want their ideas challenged. They do not want their ideas debated. They want you to treat it and take it as the gospel. So in order to make you treat it and take it as the gospel and not even allow these issues to be up for debate, they're finding ways to restrict your First Amendment. And certainly all of these platforms owned and ran by liberal leftists, all these social media platforms, they very greatly restrict debate. They very greatly restrict ideas coming from the right because they don't want people to find out that the idea that the right has all the good ideas and the well-educated and informed debate, and they don't want to engage it. The left doesn't want to engage us. So what do? They restrict our voices on social media and academia, et cetera. Academia, et cetera. And what they've done is, in order to restrict your words, your debate, they call it hate speech. So once they identify it as hate speech, labeled as hate speech, it is then suppressed and eliminated from these social media platforms. This is the game. The Second Amendment represents a physical response to their final step of complete usurpation. What am I saying? They don't want you to have access to weapons because they understand that at a certain point, they've got to just go for this complete usurpation of your personal rights and liberties. And they know that your organic, natural response will be to grab your arms. Because at that point, there'll be no alternative. They know that. They've seen it played out in history before, and they know what their intentions are, and therefore they know what your response will be. This is the plan. This is the agenda. They reject inalienable rights. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to go very rapidly go through a few things. I'm not going to do them justice. I apologize, but they will be revisited. The coronavirus has resulted in 7 million deaths. The coronavirus has resulted in 704 million cases of coronavirus illnesses. This was an intentional crisis created by the never let a good crisis go to waste crowd. The left has repeatedly said, never let a good crisis go to waste. And I informed you, if someone has the audacity and the depravity to say, never let a good crisis go to waste, that person will very rapidly create a crisis in order to bring about their desired outcomes and results. This is what they'll do. As evil as that is, they want to why did they release the coronavirus? Well, number one, they wanted to reduce the world's population, and they did that by about 7 million. It was a test run to see how we would respond. They wanted to remove Trump. They wanted to influence the election illegally. They wanted to create fear. They wanted to create chaos. They wanted to control you because remember, your movement was restricted and you were not even allowed to go to work or church. They wanted to see how you responded to that. They wanted to protect the swamp because Trump was after the swamp. So what do you do when Trump is on the heels of the swamp? You create a coronavirus. You distribute it across the world, and that diverts everybody's attention from what they're doing. We all had to stop and pause and deal with this coronavirus. That's all they did, ladies and gentlemen. That's why they released this. They gave them the opportunity to practice a universal basic income and see how we would respond to that and how rapidly we would want to go back to work. It gave them the opportunity to practice their whole concept of 15-minute cities. They wanted to see how we responded to the suspension of basically our rights. They wanted to see how we responded to what was basically a soft form of martial law. They wanted to help Putin, China, Iran, and BRICS. This is what the globalists in America who were part of the entity that was behind this were seeking to accomplish, ladies and gentlemen. I laid it out. That's it. I mean, there's more to it, but that's it. That's it. What does the left fear? They fear the patriarchy. What does the left fear? They fear Judeo-Christian values and principles. That's why they attack those things. That's why they identified those things to be attacked. What do they fear? They fear the First Amendment. The left also fears the Second Amendment. And this is why they are after Trump, because he represents the most credible threat to their agenda electorally. Let me repeat. That's why they fear Trump. That's why they are after Trump. But here's the key part. He represents the most credible threat to their agenda electorally. But that's MAGA. When you throw MAGA in there, which they are after that, attacking that as well, now the threat grows beyond an electoral threat to an all-out threat to their Luciferian agenda. This is where we are. This is what we're at. This is what we're dealing with. In closing, ladies and gentlemen, please, I need you to listen, comment, share, follow, subscribe, and contribute. You see how to contribute down there at the bottom? You see that MAGA means Make America Judeo-Christian Again? And you understand, you've learned today that MAGA must be powered by MAGA if MAGA is going to be successful. And you saw that MAGA did not have the complete success that we were looking for, because at the end of the day, we're not successful if we don't change hearts and minds and take us back in the direction of Judeo-Christian values and principles. Thank you for tuning in. Until next time,